To begin to understand the Great Harvest is to first acknowledge the silent, shimmering architecture that underpins the perceived world, a structure not made of stone or steel, but of the very vibrations we call our existence. We often move through our days as though we are mere observers of a finished play, spectators in a theater of consequences where the script was written long before we arrived. We treat our time as the primary denominator of our lives, counting the minutes like grains of sand slipping through an hourglass. Yet we fail to notice the quality of the sand itself. Time is a hollow vessel, a container that holds no inherent value until it is filled with the vital fluid of our attention and intention. This vital fluid, this subtle and multifaceted resonance we emit with every thought, every pulse of emotion, and every focused gaze is the true currency of the cosmos. It is the gold of the gods, the nectar of the unseen, and the fuel that drives the engine of creation and consumption alike. When we speak of the Great Harvest, we are not speaking of a distant agricultural event in some celestial field, but of the ongoing, moment-by-moment extraction and exchange of this energetic essence. Imagine for a moment that the universe is not a cold vacuum of dead matter, but a living, breathing tapestry of interconnected frequencies. In this vast web, every living soul acts as a node, a luminous point of origin that broadcasts a specific signature into the surrounding ether. This signature is not static. It fluctuates with the tides of our inner landscape. When we are consumed by the fires of resentment or the chilling depths of despair, our frequency takes on a specific density and hue. When we are elevated by the soaring heights of unconditional love or the crystalline clarity of creative flow, our resonance shifts into a higher, more refined octave. These are not merely subjective experiences confined to the skull. They are literal emissions of power. Just as a physical currency allows for the movement of goods in a marketplace, our energy allows for the movement of reality in the metaphysical sphere. However, because we have been conditioned to look outward at the shadows on the cave wall, we have forgotten the light that casts them. We have been taught to value the artifacts of our labor, the houses, the numbers in a digital ledger, the accolades of peers, while ignoring the very life force we spent to acquire them. This fundamental misunderstanding of value has made us vulnerable to a harvest we rarely perceive. The Great Harvest is a concept that bridges the gap between ancient spiritual warnings and modern existential anxieties. It suggests that our world is designed, perhaps by forces we have yet to fully name, to act as a grand refinery. This refinery operates by provoking us, by stirring the waters of our psyche to ensure a constant churn of emotional output. Every conflict that ignites the blood, every fear that keeps the mind pacing in a narrow cell, and every frantic desire for more than what is present serves to release energy into the collective field. We find ourselves living in a culture that prizes frantic activity over soulful presence, a culture that rewards the expenditure of spirit while offering only hollow shells in return. We are like batteries that believe the machinery we power is our own, unaware that we are being drained to sustain a system that does not know our names. To recognize this is not to descend into cynicism, but to ascend into a state of profound lucidity. It is the first step toward reclaiming the throne of our own consciousness. The significance of our energy as a currency becomes clear when we observe where the world directs our attention. Attention is the bridge across which our energy travels. Wherever we look, we pour ourselves. In the modern age, the battle for this attention has reached a fever pitch, a digital and psychological crusade intended to fragment our focus and harvest the resulting sparks of irritation, lust, or envy. We are told that our data is the new oil, but data is merely the map. The oil itself is the human spirit, the raw vitality that reacts to the stimuli presented to us. When we give our energy away to the trivial, the hateful, or the illusory, we are essentially bankrupting ourselves in the only market that truly matters. We are trading the eternal for the ephemeral, the divine spark for the flickering neon of a passing distraction. The Great Harvest thrives on this unconsciousness, on the tendency of the human heart to scatter its riches to the wind without ever realizing it was wealthy to begin with. As we stand at the threshold of this exploration, We must ask ourselves what it means to truly own our energy. If the universe views our vitality as its most precious resource, why do we treat it as if it were an infinite and cheap commodity? We wake up and immediately begin the process of distribution, handing out pieces of our peace to the morning news, the frustrations of traffic, and the expectations of a world that demands we be everything but ourselves. By the time the sun reaches its zenith, many of us are already hollowed out, shells of potential that have been tapped and drained before we could ever plant a seed of our own choosing. The great harvest is not an inevitable doom, but a call to sovereign stewardship. It is an invitation to look at the ledger of our lives and realize that we have been the greatest philanthropists of our own destruction, giving our power to any shadow that passes by. To understand the cosmic dimension of this currency, one must contemplate the nature of the harvesters. Whether one views these as metaphorical archetypes of our own shadow selves, systemic structures of control in a material world, or more esoteric entities described in the whispered traditions of old, the result is the same. There is a pull toward the externalization of power. This pull acts as a gravity, dragging our high-frequency potential down into the low-frequency mists of reaction and survival. In these lower states, we are more easily managed and more predictably harvested. A soul in a state of joy is a poor source of fuel for a system built on lack. A soul in a state of fear is a gusher of raw, potent energy. Thus, the world around us often seems curated to produce the very states of being that keep the harvest bountiful. It is a subtle and pervasive ecology of the unseen. Yet within this realization lies a profound and transformative secret. If our energy is the currency, then we are the mint. We possess the innate capacity to generate, transmute, and direct this power according to our own divine blueprint. The great harvest can only claim what we leave unguarded or what we trade away in ignorance. By becoming conscious of the flow of our internal states, by learning to seal the leaks in our psychic vessel, and by choosing to invest our resonance in that which is beautiful, true, and enduring, we begin to change the nature of the exchange. We move from being the harvested to being the gardeners. We start to understand that the universe is not just out there, demanding its due, but is also right here within the beating of the heart, waiting for us to realize that we are the ones who hold the keys to the treasury. The introduction to this mystery is a journey from the surface to the depths. It requires a willingness to see the world not as a collection of objects, but as a symphony of vibrations. It asks us to consider that our exhaustion is not just physical, but metaphysical, a sign that we are being lived by the world instead of living in it. As we peel back the layers of the great harvest, why your energy is the most valuable currency in the universe, we will discover the mechanisms of this cosmic economy, and more importantly, the path toward reclaiming our birthright as sovereign beings of light. The harvest is plenty, but the laborers of consciousness are often few. It is time to step out of the fields of extraction and into the temple of our own inner brilliance, where the only currency that matters is the purity of our own presence. To delve into the core themes of the great harvest is to enter a laboratory of the soul where the lead of common experience is transmuted into the gold of conscious realization. At the heart of this cosmic economy lies the principle of vibrational resonance, a law as unwavering as gravity, but far more intimate. We must understand that we are not merely having emotions, we are broadcasting them. Each state of being creates a ripple in the fabric of the underlying reality, and these ripples are the primary harvest of the universe. The first pillar of this understanding is the realization that the universe is non-dual in its appetite. It does not distinguish between good or bad energy in the way a human moralist might, but rather categorizes energy by its intensity and its yield. High-density emotional states, fear, rage, lust, and crippling anxiety produce a thick, potent discharge that is easily captured by the structures of the world. High-frequency states, peace, gratitude, and transcendent joy create a finer, more elusive essence that serves a different, more evolutionary purpose. The tension of our modern existence is largely a result of a system designed to keep us in the high-yield, low-frequency zone, where our vital currency is most easily extracted. The second guiding pillar is the illusion of scarcity, a masterstroke of psychological architecture that ensures the harvest remains bountiful. We are conditioned from the moment of our first breath to believe that there is not enough time, not enough love, not enough security, and certainly not enough power. This belief in lack triggers a survival response that forces our energy outward. When we believe we are lacking, we become hunters and gatherers of external validation, constantly leaking our vitality into the environment as we seek to fill an internal void that was never actually there. This perceived scarcity is the engine of the harvest. It keeps the human spirit in a state of perpetual motion, a frantic spinning of the wheel that generates the very friction the system feeds upon. If we were to suddenly realize our inherent abundance, the fact that we are infinite wells of creative potential, the machinery of the harvest would grind to a halt for lack of fuel. Thus, the maintenance of the illusion of not enough is essential for the continued extraction of our most valuable currency. Interwoven with this is the concept of the archon of distraction, a thematic representation of the myriad ways our focus is fragmented. In the ancient texts, there was often talk of guardians or gatekeepers that diverted the soul from its true path, but in the contemporary context, these are found in the glowing screens, the constant notifications, and the manufactured crises of the day. Every time our attention is hijacked by a triviality or a synthetic outrage, a transaction has occurred. We have traded a portion of our sovereign energy for a momentary spike of dopamine or a fleeting sense of righteous indignation. These microtransactions, repeated thousands of times a day, constitute a massive, invisible drain on the human collective. We wonder why we feel spiritually exhausted, why we lack the creative fire to change our lives, and the answer lies in the ledger of these unnoticed leaks. We are being bled dry by 1,000 tiny cuts of distraction, each one a small harvest that adds up to the total eclipse of our potential. Another core concept is the duality of the solar versus lunar pathways of energy. The solar path is the way of the conscious creator, where energy is generated from within through the alignment of will and spirit. It is a radiant path, one that gives to the universe from a place of overflow. The lunar path, conversely, is the way of the reflector and the reactor. It is the path most of humanity currently treads, where our energy is merely a reflection of the stimuli we receive. On the lunar path, we do not act, we are acted upon. We do not feel, we react to feelings. This reactive state is the ideal condition for the great harvest, as it makes the human vessel predictable and easily milked for its emotional output. To move from the lunar to the solar is to undergo a radical internal revolution, shifting from a being that is harvested by circumstances to a being that illuminates its own reality. Central to this exploration is the theme of the emotional loosh, a term sometimes used in esoteric circles to describe the specific energetic byproduct of intense human emotion. Whether we use this specific terminology or prefer to speak of bioenergetic output, the reality remains that our internal states have a tangible impact on the environment. There is a deep, hidden truth in the idea that certain structures in our society, from the Colosseums of old to the digital arenas of today, are designed specifically to generate and collect this loosh. When thousands of people are synchronized in a state of fear, or when a population is kept in a state of low-level chronic stress, the yield is enormous. This energy doesn't simply disappear. It is recycled into the maintenance of the very structures that provoked it, creating a closed-loop system of energetic enslavement. Breaking this loop requires more than just intellectual understanding. It requires a disciplined mastery of one's own emotional landscape. Furthermore, we must address the theme of the sovereign bond. This is the inherent contract between the soul and the source, a contract that states our energy belongs to us by divine right. However, like any contract, it can be bypassed if we sign away our rights through unconscious consent. We give our consent every time we identify more with the mask than the face, every time we value the system's rewards over our own integrity, and every time we allow ourselves to be defined by our traumas rather than our triumphs. The Great Harvest operates on a principle of legalism. It cannot take what is not offered, but it is a master of trickery, convincing us to offer ourselves up as a sacrifice for false gods. The reclamation of our currency begins with the revocation of this unconscious consent, a standing in one's own light and declaring that the treasury of the heart is no longer open for unauthorized withdrawal. Finally, we encounter the theme of transmutation as resistance. If the goal of the harvest is to extract low-frequency, dense energy, then the most profound act of rebellion is the cultivation of high-frequency states. When we take a moment of potential anger and transmute it into a moment of radical forgiveness, we are not just doing a good deed, we are literally changing the chemistry of the cosmic exchange. We are producing a substance that the system cannot utilize, a frequency that is invisible to the harvesters. This is the true meaning of being in the world, but not of it. By shifting our resonance, we become unharvestable. We move through the fields of extraction as ghosts in the machine, our light too bright and too fine to be caught in the nets of the mundane. This transmutation is the core work of the spiritual initiate, the practical application of the knowledge that our energy is our own, and its direction is our ultimate freedom. The core themes of the Great Harvest reveal a universe that is far more transactional than we might like to admit, but they also reveal a level of personal power that is far greater than we have been led to believe. We are not victims of a cruel cosmic farm. We are the unwitting shareholders in a company we have forgotten we own. The realization that our energy is the most valuable currency in existence is the key that unlocks the cage. It changes every interaction, every thought, and every breath from a passive occurrence into a deliberate investment. As we move deeper into this understanding, we see that the battle for our soul is not fought on some distant battlefield of light and dark, but in the quiet, private corridors of our own attention. To truly grasp the mechanics of the Great Harvest, one must step away from the analytical mind and enter the realm of the symbolic, for the soul speaks in the language of myth and shadow. Imagine, if you will, a city fashioned entirely of glass, where every inhabitant carries within their chest a flickering, iridescent bird. These birds are the source of all light in the city. Without them, the glass streets would fade into a frozen, translucent gray. The inhabitants, however, have been told from birth that the light of their birds is a dangerous, volatile thing that must be moderated, regulated, and tethered. They are taught to trade the feathers of these birds, plucked one by one, for the solid things of the world, heavy stones, iron gates, and leaden coins. They do not realize that while the stones feel real, they are only shadows cast by the very light they are trading away. The gleaners of this city are figures who walk the streets with velvet bags, offering beautiful mirrors in exchange for just a few moments of the birds singing. When the people look into these mirrors, they see aggrandized versions of themselves, but the mirrors are actually concave lenses that focus the birds' radiant heat into the gleaners' bags. The people feel a momentary warmth, a surge of egoic pride, but they leave the encounter colder, their inner light dimmed, while the gleaners grow heavy with the stolen glow of 1,000 fragmented songs. In this allegory, the birds represent our core energetic essence, the raw loosh or vitality that is our birthright. The mirrors are the distractions of the material world, the social validations, the digital feedback loops, and the manufactured dramas that promise to reflect our importance back to us. We give our energy to these reflections because we have forgotten that we are the source of the light. The Great Harvest is the process by which the gleaners, those systemic or archetypal forces that thrive on externalized power, convince us that the reflection is more valuable than the lamp. There is a specific narrative within this symbolic world concerning the master of the loom, a figure who claims to weave the very fabric of destiny. He tells the people that if they do not contribute their light to his great tapestry, the world will unravel into chaos. Out of fear, the people offer their most intense emotions, their grief, their terror, and their desperate hope to the weaver. He takes these threads and creates a magnificent, shimmering veil that hangs over the city, beautiful to behold, but so thick that it eventually blots out the sun. The people praise the weaver for the beauty of the veil. never realizing they are worshipping a shroud made of their own stolen potential. Consider another narrative, that of the Well of the Infinite Echo. In a distant, timeless valley, there is a well that is said to grant any wish, but it requires a vocal sacrifice. To receive a boon, one must scream their greatest desire or their deepest fear into the abyss. The well echoes back a distorted version of that sound, which the seeker takes as an omen or a promise. What the seekers do not see is that the well is actually a resonant chamber designed to amplify and extract the frequency of human longing. The echoes are not answers. They are the sound of the seeker's own power being bounced back to them in a diminished form, while the depths of the well absorb the true resonance. This is the symbolic representation of how our prayers and intentions are often intercepted by the harvest. When we direct our power toward a savior or a system outside of ourselves, we are shouting into the well. We feel a sense of relief because we have offloaded the weight of our energy. But we have also handed over the currency required to actually manifest our own liberation. The great harvest in this context is the collection of all the screams, sighs, and whispers that were meant for the self, but were cast into the void of external dependency. There is also the story of the iron hive, a metaphor for the collective energetic entrapment of modern society. In the hive, every cell is a masterpiece of comfort, filled with soft lights and gentle hums. The inhabitants are told they are connectors, and their only job is to vibrate in response to the signals sent by the queen. When a signal of alarm is sent, the entire hive vibrates with anxiety. When a signal of appetite is sent, the hive hums with a restless, hungry heat. This vibration is harvested through the floor of the cells, powering the machinery that keeps the hive suspended above a dark, silent ocean. The inhabitants believe their vibrations are their own thoughts and feelings, but they are merely sympathetic resonances. The tragedy of the iron hive is that the inhabitants have wings, but because they are always vibrating in place to meet the queen's signals, they never think to use them. Their energy is used to maintain the very walls that keep them from the open sky. This narrative highlights the frequency fence, the symbolic barrier created by mass media, cultural conditioning, and collective trauma that keeps human consciousness within a narrow, harvestable bandwidth. Deep within these narratives lies the figure of the quiet gardener, the symbolic antithesis to the harvest. The gardener does not pluck the light or weave the veil. Instead, the gardener teaches the inhabitants of the glass city how to breathe with their birds. This is the path of internal cultivation. The gardener explains that if one focuses their attention inward, the light of the bird becomes a fire that can melt the glass walls. This internal fire is not a yield that can be harvested. It is a transformative force that changes the nature of the observer. In the symbolic language of the great harvest, the gardener represents the esoteric wisdom traditions that teach energy work, breath control, and the alchemy of the heart. These traditions understand that the universe is a predator-prey ecosystem on many levels, and the only way to exit the food chain of the spirit is to become inedible, to raise one's frequency to a pitch that the hooks of the harvest cannot catch. The final symbolic thread is the labyrinth of the 1,000 gates. In this story, a soul is told that to reach the center of existence, it must pass through 1,000 gates, each requiring a toll of vitality. Most souls spend their entire journey counting their coins, worried about whether they will have enough to pay the next gatekeeper. However, at the center of the labyrinth, there is no throne or treasure, there is only a mirror. When the soul finally reaches the center, bankrupt and exhausted, it looks into the mirror and realizes that the gatekeepers were merely its own reflections, and the tolls were never actually required. The labyrinth was designed to see if the soul would realize its own sovereignty before it ran out of currency. The great harvest is the labyrinth. It is the cosmic test of value. It asks, do you know what you are worth, or will you spend yourself on the way to a center that you already occupy? These stories serve as maps for the territory of the unseen. They remind us that our energy is not just a biological byproduct, but a sacred substance that is being vied for by forces both seen and unseen. The harvest is not a punishment, but a property of a certain level of density. Just as a plant harvests sunlight and a hawk harvests the mouse, there are strata of reality that harvest the human emotional output. By engaging with these symbolic narratives, we move from the position of the prey to the position of the observer. We begin to see the velvet bags of the gleaners and the iron walls of the hive for what they are. This lucidity is the first genuine defense against the extraction of our essence. For once the trick is seen, it can no longer be performed with the same efficacy. To move from the celestial metaphors of the harvest into the grit of daily existence is to realize that the cosmic economy is managed from the palm of your hand and the focus of your eyes. Practical integration begins with the radical act of energetic auditing, a process of observing the mundane transactions we engage in from the moment we wake. If energy is the most valuable currency in the universe, then we must treat our attention with the same scrutiny a banker treats a high-stakes ledger. We often find ourselves in a state of leaking, where our vitality is siphoned off by minor irritations, unresolved microstresses, and the compulsive need to respond to every digital ping. These are not merely habits, they are the valves of the harvest. To close these valves, one must practice the art of the sacred pause. This is the deliberate insertion of a moment of stillness between a stimulus, such as an insulting comment or a frightening news headline, and the internal reaction. In that pause, you withhold the loosh. You choose to retain your currency rather than spending it on a reflex that serves only to diminish your peace. Real-world implication of this sovereignty manifests most clearly in our relationship with modern technology. We must recognize that the attention economy is the literal, material world shadow of the great harvest. Platforms are designed to trigger high-yield emotional states, outrage, comparison, and fear of missing out, because these states create the most engagement, which is to say, they extract the most energy. Integration involves a conscious decoupling from these systems. This does not necessarily mean a total withdrawal from society, but rather a shift in how we engage. It is the difference between being a consumer who is consumed and a sovereign observer who uses a tool. When we check our devices, not out of a phantom itch of lack, but with a specific, time-bound purpose, we are guarding our treasury. We are refusing to let the gleaners of the digital age reach into our chest and pluck the feathers of our focus. Furthermore, the integration of these truths demands a restructuring of our social and professional boundaries. Many of us are surrounded by energy vampires, individuals or environments that thrive on the provocation of our emotional labor. In the context of the great harvest, these are the unwitting agents of the refinery. Practical sovereignty means learning to set boundaries that are not walls of anger, but shields of transparency. When we refuse to engage in the drama cycles of others, we are not being cold. We are being protective of the divine spark that allows us to be truly helpful in the first place. A person who is energetically bankrupt cannot assist anyone. By maintaining our own frequency, we become a point of stability in a chaotic field. This stability is infectious. It offers a silent invitation to others to also stop their own leaking, creating a localized anti-harvest zone where energy is cultivated rather than extracted. Another vital practice is the somatic sealing of the body. Since our energy is housed in the vessel of the flesh, the state of our nervous system is the primary interface for the harvest. A nervous system stuck in fight or flight is a wide-open tap of vital currency. Integration involves daily practices that signal safety to the body. Deep, diaphragmatic breathing, grounding the feet on the earth, and the deliberate cultivation of grateful resonance. Gratitude is not just a polite sentiment, it is a sophisticated energetic maneuver. It is a state of fullness that effectively tells the universe, and any would-be harvesters, that there is no lack to be exploited here. In a state of true gratitude, the frequency is too high and too smooth for the hooks of the harvest to catch. We become slippery to the system. We move through the world with a full tank, and from this fullness, our actions become creative rather than reactive. We must also address the currency of speech. Every word we speak is a directed pulse of energy. In our daily lives, we often spend our currency through idle gossip, complaining, or the constant narration of our own limitations. This is a form of energetic littering that leaves us depleted. Practical integration teaches us to use speech as an invocation. Before speaking, one might ask, is this worth the energy required to say it? Does this word build my treasury or drain it? By speaking with intention, we begin to command the reality around us rather than merely reacting to it. This discipline transforms our social interactions from sites of extraction into sites of mutual empowerment. We stop being milked for our opinions and start being heard for our wisdom. Finally, real-world integration requires a shift in how we view work and production. In the current paradigm, we are taught that our value is tied to our output, how many tasks we complete, how much capital we generate. The Great Harvest perspective flips this. Your value is the quality of the energy you maintain while you work. If you produce a masterpiece, but do so in a state of frantic, self-hating exhaustion, the system has harvested you regardless of the success of the product. If, however, you perform a simple task with a sense of internal mastery and calm joy, you have won. You have kept your currency while still interacting with the world. This is the art of the invisible work, where the primary goal of every day is not the completion of the to-do list, but the preservation and elevation of one's own vibrational state. As we apply these principles, we notice a profound change in the texture of our lives. The world may still be a place of extraction, and the gleaners may still walk the streets, but they no longer have a key to our house. We begin to see the crises of the world as the noise of the machinery, rather than the truth of our existence. We start to experience a surplus of vitality, a spiritual profit that can be used for genuine creation, for healing, and for the awakening of others. This is the practical end game of understanding the Great Harvest. To become a being so wealthy in spirit that the very idea of being harvested becomes an impossibility. We stand at the precipice of a final realization, a threshold where the awareness of the Great Harvest ceases to be a burden of knowledge and becomes the catalyst for a total metamorphosis. Throughout this journey, we have navigated the hidden architecture of the cosmic refinery, identified the pillars of vibrational resonance, and walked through the symbolic galleries of the glass garden and the iron hive. We have grounded these insights into the practical mastery of our daily attention. Now, we must synthesize these threads into a singular, transformational call to action. The ultimate truth of the Great Harvest, why your energy is the most valuable currency in the universe, is not that we are victims of a cosmic extraction, but that we are the stewards of a power so immense it requires a universe-wide system just to manage its overflow. The harvest exists only because we are, by our very nature, infinite fountains of life force. You are not a grain of wheat waiting for the scythe. You are the sun that makes the field possible. To heed the transformational call is to undergo a radical shift in identity. For eons, the human story has been one of survival, a desperate attempt to secure enough external resources to persist for another day. We have looked at the world as a predator, a cold machine, or a demanding god. But when we recognize that our internal resonance is the primary currency, the external world reveals itself as a mirror. The harvesters are merely the shadows cast by our own forgotten sovereignty. When we stop fearing the extraction loses its grip. When we stop offering our outrage, our terror, and our frantic desire as tribute to the systems of control, those systems begin to wither. They are not self-sustaining. They are parasitic. They require your consent, your attention, and your frequency to remain relevant. The moment you decide that your energy is no longer for sale, you become a ghost in their machinery, a sovereign entity that can no longer be measured, managed, or milked. This transformation requires a deep, uncompromising honesty about where we still seek the comfort of the cage. It is easy to rail against the unseen harvesters while simultaneously feeding our vitality to the digital arenas of vanity or the hollow conflicts of the ego. The call is to bring our currency home. This is the great return. It is the process of pulling our scattered threads of attention back from the 1,000 directions they have been cast. Imagine the immense power that would be available to you if you no longer spent it on defending an image, lamenting the past, or fearing a curated future. That recovered energy is the seed capital of a new existence. With it, you do not just survive the harvest, you transcend the field entirely. You begin to build a life that is an expression of your own divine blueprint, rather than a reaction to a systemic stimulus. The message of the great harvest is ultimately one of profound hope and immense responsibility. If our energy is the currency of the universe, then we are the architects of the reality we inhabit. Every thought we think and every emotion we cultivate is a vote for the kind of universe we wish to see. We have the choice to produce louche, the dense, bitter fuel of a world in pain, or we can produce manna, the refined, luminous essence of a world in awakening. This is not a metaphorical choice. It is a literal, energetic one. As we elevate our personal frequency, we contribute to a collective shift that makes the old systems of extraction obsolete. A high-frequency collective cannot be harvested. It is like trying to catch light in a net made of shadows. The net simply ceases to be. We are entering an era where the invisibility of these transactions is fading. The veils are thinning, and the mechanics of the great harvest are becoming visible to those with the eyes to see. This visibility is the birth of the sovereign human. To be sovereign is to know that your peace is non-negotiable, your joy is your own creation, and your energy is a sacred trust. It is to walk through the marketplace of the world and realize that while everything has a price, your soul is not a commodity. The transformational call is to live from this place of unshakable internal wealth. It is to look at the gleaners and the weavers of the world and offer them nothing but the silent, radiant light of a being who has remembered who they are. As this narrative concludes, the invitation remains open. The great harvest continues for those who remain asleep, but for you, the dream has changed. You are no longer the crop, you are the gardener. You are the one who decides what shall grow in the sanctuary of your heart. Invest your currency wisely. Spend your attention on that which is eternal. Cultivate a resonance that sings with the harmony of the stars. In doing so, you fulfill the true purpose of your existence, not to be consumed by the universe, but to illuminate it. The treasury is open, the seals are broken, and the power has always been yours. Step out of the fields and into your brilliance, for the time of the harvest is over, and the time of the great radiance has begun. This concludes our exploration of the great harvest. May your light remain your own.